In August of 1619, slaves landed in Virginia, eventually being traded for food. This was a new use for the settlers and colonizers at the time. While slavery wasn't a new concept, usually slaves were kept for personal use, attending to household and crop matters. You could own your own slaves, certainly kidnap those in distant land who you found to be sufficient, but there was no stock market for them or any monetary value placed on them. But now with this trade, things changed. Slaves could be traded, and if they are to be traded, then there must be a value assigned to them. And like with all other property, laws had to be formed to help regulate the trade, protect the owners, and stop nefarious acts. The transatlantic slave trade had gone on for 100 or so years by August 1619. But this turning point made all things, well, worse. The trades continued and eventually boosted the population of southern states and the fortunes of many land-owning families. And our nation continued to grow. On July 4th, 1776, the final draft to the Declaration of Independence was copied and sent for signatures from the colonies. The future of a nation hung in the balance. Yes, independence from Britain was desired, but no one wanted to fight against the most powerful military force in the world at the time and the most powerful the world had ever seen. All along the Atlantic seaboard, passing ships carrying slaves, the draft document declaring that all men are created equal reached state houses and assemblymen for a final vote. On August 2nd, 1776, Congress being assembled inside the Pennsylvania State House, 157 years after Governor George Yeardley bought over 20 black people with food and with the pens supplied by slaves, signed the document declaring that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because men with darker skin tones were not defined as men, this didn't apply to them. And so, 87 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. Everyone would get the memo until 3 years later, June 19th, 1866, where the last of the slaves in Texas were told. This day is now celebrated as Juneteenth. Thank you, Pastor Michael, for giving me this opportunity to do this. And I thank all of you for tuning in to The Main Ingredient. This month's show and content will look a little different. Our series will pick up next week with the conversation on Black entrepreneurship and economics. Throughout the series, we'll be talking about the rich history of culture, ways to move forward, and what it means to love people. Our hope is that you will have the vision to see what life would look like if we all treated one another, loved one another, understood one another, celebrated one another, embraced one another, as God intended and created us to. Revelation 7, 9, and 10 says, "After this I saw a vast crowd, too great to count, from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands. And they were shouting with a great roar, 'Salvation comes from our God who sits on the throne and from the Lamb.'" What happens when we are free in our hearts, free from hatred, free from jealousy and lust, free from apathy and self-desire? What happens when we're free to love God as intended, free to care as God commands, free to seek to understand each other despite our politics or our social status? What does the world look like? What do we look like when we're free?